I was supposed to be escorted out of the building by security. Instead, my sweet, clumsy neighbour just kicked the boardroom doors off their hinges, forced my billionaire boss to his knees, and slid a 5-carat diamond onto my trembling finger. I didn't know it then, but my normal life was over, and the shy boy next door was going to make sure I never left his sight again. Before we find out what this Underworld King does to the men who made me cry, hit that subscribe button to join Mimi's Romance Diary. If you crave dangerously possessive men who will burn the city down to protect what's theirs, let's dive in. I gave this conglomerate 5 years of my blood and sweat. I gave Tristan 2 years of my life. Now the arrogant CEO was publicly ruining me, having stolen my massive data project just to hand it to his new fiancée. "Pack your desk, Sophie. You're fired," Tristan smirked, leaning back in his plush leather chair at the head of the polished mahogany table. 12 elite board members stared at me, whispering and laughing. "Security, grab her. Escort her to the service elevator. I don't want her cheap perfume lingering in my executive suite." 2 massive guards grabbed my arms aggressively, scattering my files across the marble floor. I struggled against their grip. Then the 10-foot solid oak boardroom doors exploded. They weren't just pushed open, they were kicked completely off their reinforced hinges, crashing to the floor in a cloud of splintered wood. A suffocating silence swallowed the room. The man stepping through the dust was Yun-ji, my quiet Korean neighbour. The awkward guy who wore oversized knit sweaters and left warm cherry pastries at my door every Sunday. Except today, there was no sweater. He was poured into a bespoke 3-piece charcoal suit. The top 2 buttons of his crisp shirt were undone, revealing dark, intricate dragon scales inked into his skin, coiling dangerously up the left side of his neck. He wasn't clumsy. He moved like an apex predator. "Take your hands off my wife." His voice was a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated the glass walls. "Who the hell are you?" one guard barked. Yun-ji didn't even pull his hands out of his tailored pockets. With a terrifying, fluid grace, he delivered a brutal kick to the guard's chest, sending the 200-pound man flying backward over the table, shattering a dozen champagne glasses. The second guard instantly dropped my arm, backing away in pure terror. Yun-ji crossed the room, his dark, predatory eyes locked entirely on me. The smell of fresh laundry was gone, replaced by the intoxicating scent of smoked cedar and expensive scotch. He reached out, his calloused hand, knuckles bruised and coated in fresh blood, gently cupping my jaw. "Did they hurt you, Sophie?" he whispered, the lethal edge melting into dark devotion. Tristan stood up, trembling. "Call the police. I am the CEO of this billion-dollar conglomerate. I will bury you." Yun-ji simply snapped his fingers. 6 heavily armed men in immaculate black suits stormed the room, sealing the exits. One walked straight to Tristan, slapping a stamped manila folder onto his chest. "As of 3 minutes ago, you are no longer the CEO," the man stated. "Your family's majority shares were forcibly liquidated and purchased in cash by the Daishin Syndicate." Tristan collapsed back into his chair, the blood draining from his face. Yun-ji slid his arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his solid chest. The heat of his body burned right through my pencil skirt. "You fired her to humiliate her," Yun-ji said, his gaze freezing the room. So I bought the company to humiliate you. You don't work for them anymore, Queen. You own them. The heavy silence of the executive elevator felt infinitely more dangerous than the shattered boardroom we had just left. The polished metal doors slid shut, sealing me inside a glass and steel cage with a man I suddenly didn't know at all. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored panels. I looked exactly the same. A fired executive in a rumpled white silk blouse. But the man standing rigidly beside me, the man whose massive tattooed hand still possessed my waist, was a lethal stranger. My heart beat a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. The adrenaline that had kept me standing was rapidly evaporating, leaving a cold, trembling panic in its wake. The sweet, shy neighbor who stumbled over his words when asking to borrow sugar had just bought $1 billion conglomerate in cash and shattered a security guard's ribs without blinking. "You lied to me," I whispered, the sound barely carrying over the quiet hum of the descending elevator. I tried to step away, needing distance to breathe, but his grip instantly tightened. Yunji shifted, moving with that same fluid, predatory grace. He stepped squarely into my personal space, walking me backward until my shoulder blades hit the cold glass of the elevator wall. He didn't hurt me, but his large frame completely caged me in. The blistering heat radiating from his chest enveloped me, entirely erasing the chill of the air conditioning. He braced one hand against the glass beside my head, leaning down until his lips hovered mere inches from my ear. "I hid the parts of me that would scare you away," he murmured, his deep voice wrapping around me like a heavy velvet blanket. "But I never lied about wanting you, Sophie." I stared up into his dark, calculating eyes. The intricate dragon scales inked up his neck seemed to shift with every steady breath he took. My chest heaved, my lungs desperately trying to pull in oxygen, but all I could breathe was his intoxicating scent of smoked cedar and danger. My hands trembled violently at my sides. Sensing the absolute terror threatening to break me, Yunji lowered his head. He pressed his forehead firmly against mine, grounding me with his solid, unwavering weight. His free hand slid up from my waist, his long fingers burying into my dark curls, anchoring the back of my neck. "Breathe with me, Queen," he commanded softly, his thumb brushing a slow, steady circle against my racing pulse. "You are completely safe. The worst part of your day is already over." But he was wrong. The digital floor indicator chimed, glowing a bright crimson -2. We had bypassed the main lobby completely. The metal doors slid open, and a rush of damp, freezing air flooded the cabin. We weren't alone. Dozens of heavily armed men in black tactical gear stood in perfect, terrifying formation across the concrete, subterranean garage. The armored SUV tore through the city, leaving my ruined corporate life far behind. I sat, frozen in the plush leather seat, staring at the man who was supposed to be my harmless neighbor. Yunji didn't take me back to our run-down apartment building. The vehicle bypassed the city limits entirely, pulling into a private subterranean garage beneath a towering, glass-fronted skyscraper. A private elevator shot us to the top floor, opening directly into a sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the nighttime skyline, but my focus was entirely on him. He tossed his suit jacket onto a dark velvet sofa and turned to face me. The dragon ink scaling his neck looked even more dangerous under the sleek, modern lighting. "You bought my company," I said, my voice trembling but laced with rising anger. You have an army waiting in the basement. Why were you living in a cramped, leaky apartment that smells like old paint? He closed the distance between us with that slow, predatory grace, backing me into the cool marble of the kitchen island. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. I wasn't living there, Sophie. I was waiting there. My breath caught. Waiting for what? He reached out, his large, calloused fingers gently capturing a loose curl that had escaped my updo. 4 months ago, a rival syndicate tried to use your data firm as a front. I went there to clear it out. That was the night I saw you. His thumb brushed the shell of my ear, sending a dangerous thrill straight to my core. The drunk executive grabbed your wrist. Before my men could step out of the shadows, you broke a heavy glass decanter over his head and told him to back off. A faint, dark smile touched his lips. In my world, survival is everything. I watched you fight, and I knew instantly I couldn't walk away. So, I bought your apartment building. I moved into 4B to make sure no one ever laid a hand on you again. Keeping you safe became my only priority. The absolute authority in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was a king who had orchestrated his entire life around me. I don't need a bodyguard, I whispered, though my traitorous body leaned into his warmth. You need an empire, he corrected softly, his gaze dropping to my lips. Before I could respond, the atmosphere fractured. A tiny glowing red dot materialized through the reinforced glass window. It slid instantly across the white silk of my blouse, stopping directly over my heart. Yunji's dark eyes flared with raw violence. He didn't shout. He just lunged, his massive frame wrapping entirely around me as he tackled us violently to the cold marble floor, plunging the penthouse into absolute darkness. The marble floor of the penthouse was still cold against my skin when Yunji pulled me to my feet. The sniper's laser was gone, the reinforced glass untouched, but the threat hung heavy in the quiet room. He didn't let me panic or ask questions. He simply guided me to the master suite and told me to get dressed. We had an empire to run. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I wasn't an overwhelmed, humiliated employee anymore. I was walking back into the same towering glass skyscraper, but this time, the heavy weight of a bespoke black power suit felt like absolute armor. Yunji walked a fraction of a step behind me, a silent, terrifying shadow in an immaculate dark suit. His lethal presence cleared our path instantly, terrified employees pressing themselves against the lobby walls as we passed. We bypassed the service elevator Tristan had banished me to, taking the private executive lift straight to the top. When I pushed open the heavy temporary boardroom doors, the frantic arguing inside instantly died. The 12 elite board members who had laughed at me yesterday were huddled together, their faces pale. Tristan stood at the head of the table, sweating profusely through his expensive navy jacket. "You can't be here, Sophie," Tristan sneered, though his voice wavered. "This is a hostile takeover. We are voting to nullify the sale right now." Yunji didn't say a single word. He stepped into the room, his dark, calculating eyes sweeping the executives, and gave a microscopic nod. 2 of his men in black tactical gear stepped forward, grabbing the heavy metal handles of the double doors. The metallic thud of the deadbolts locking echoed with terrifying finality. "No one is voting," I stated. My voice was completely steady, anchored by the scorching heat of Yunji's calloused hand coming to rest on the small of my back. I walked to the head of the mahogany table. Tristan scrambled backward, his bravado crumbling the second Yunji's predatory gaze shifted to him. "You wanted my data project, Tristan?" I asked, dropping a thick leather folder directly onto the polished wood. "I reviewed the financials at 4 in the morning. You embezzled $30 million from the offshore accounts to fund your new fiancé's lifestyle." The board members gasped, turning on him in a second. "You are all fired," I announced, the authority ringing clear in the silent room. "Leave your keycards on the table. Security will escort you out." A rush of fierce, undeniable triumph flooded my veins. I looked back at Yunji. A slow, wicked smile touched his lips, his eyes burning with dark, possessive pride. But the victory shattered a second later. The locked boardroom doors rattled violently. Heavy boots kicked the wood, and the doors forced open. A squad of armed city police swarmed the room, their weapons drawn. Tristan's panicked expression morphed into a vicious, triumphant smirk as he pointed directly at me. "Arrest her!" Tristan yelled over the chaos, waving a stamped legal document. "That's a warrant for corporate espionage and grand larceny." Tristan's triumphant laughter echoed off the glass walls as the armed officers advanced. He waved the forged warrant like a victory flag, his smug confidence entirely restored. He truly believed he had won. He believed the law could touch us. I stiffened, preparing for the worst, but the scorching heat of Yunji's hand never left my lower back. He didn't flinch. He didn't even drop his dark, lazy gaze from Tristan's pathetic display. With agonizing slowness, Yunji reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit. He pulled out a sleek black phone, tapped a single contact, and lifted it to his ear. He spoke exactly 2 words in rapid, sharp Korean. Then he hung up. "Handcuff her!" Tristan yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "She stole $30 million. The lead officer reached for his restraints, but a sharp, authoritative voice barked from the hallway, freezing every man in the room. Heavy, hurried footsteps broke through the crowd of officers. The city police chief himself pushed through the boardroom doors, breathless and sweating through his uniform collar. Tristan's arrogant smile widened. "Chief Davis, you came to handle this thief personally. Excellent." Chief Davis didn't even look at Tristan. He marched straight past my trembling ex-boss, stopped 2 feet away from Yunji, and bowed deeply. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. "Mr. Yun," the chief stammered, his voice shaking. "I apologize for the intrusion. My men were misinformed by a fraudulent distress call." The colour instantly drained from Tristan's face. The forged warrant fluttered from his trembling fingers, landing silently on the mahogany table. Yunji finally stepped forward. He moved with that terrifying, fluid grace, picking up the falsified document. He glanced at it for a fraction of a second before dropping it on the polished floor and stepping on it with his custom leather boot. "Arrest him," Yunji murmured. His voice was a low, vibrating hum that commanded the entire squad. "Forgery, embezzlement, wasting my wife's valuable time." Chief Davis didn't hesitate. He gestured sharply, and the same officers who had been advancing on me aggressively grabbed Tristan, slamming him face first onto the table to cuff him. Tristan screamed, thrashing wildly against the mahogany. "You can't do this! I own this city! You can't just buy the police!" Tristan sobbed, his arrogance completely shattered. Yunji walked slowly to the edge of the table. He leaned down, his face hovering mere inches from Tristan's ear. The room was chaotic, but I heard his dark, merciless whisper perfectly. "I didn't buy the police, Tristan," Yunji promised softly. "I am the law, and the men waiting in your holding cell tonight work exclusively for me." As they dragged my screaming ex out of the boardroom, a terrifying, intoxicating truth settled into my bones. My sweet neighbour didn't just rule the criminal underworld, he owned the entire city. The absolute chaos of the morning finally settled, leaving only a thick, electric tension between us as we returned to the penthouse. Tonight was the city's annual corporate banquet. Yesterday, I wasn't even invited. Tonight, as the new CEO, I was the guest of honour. Spread across the dark coverlet of the master bed was a breathtaking, deep emerald silk gown. I slipped the heavy, luxurious fabric over my shoulders, but my fingers couldn't manage the intricate clasp at the nape of my neck. I stepped out of the walk-in closet. Yunji was already dressed in a flawless midnight blue tuxedo, leaning casually against the doorframe. He was watching me with a dark, starving focus. I turned my back to him, lifting my dark curls out of the way. He didn't rush. He closed the distance with a slow, predatory grace, the intoxicating scent of smoked cedar completely surrounding me. His calloused, heavily tattooed fingers brushed against my bare shoulders. The scorching heat of his touch melted right through the thin emerald silk, leaving a trail of fire along my skin as he secured the delicate clasp. "You look terrified, Queen," he murmured, his lips hovering mere millimeters from my ear. "I've never walked into a room of billionaires before," I admitted, my voice a breathless whisper. His large hands slid from my shoulders down to my waist, gripping me with a grounding, possessive weight. "They are nothing. When you walk into that ballroom tonight, you don't look down. You own them. And anyone who forgets that will answer to me." An hour later, the bright flash of paparazzi cameras blinded me as we stepped out of the armoured SUV. The grand ballroom of the plaza was packed with the city's elite. The moment Yunji and I walked through the gilded doors, the entire chaotic room fell dead silent. He kept me flush against his side, a lethal, untouchable shadow demanding absolute respect from the people who had mocked me yesterday. We moved through the crowd, the elite parting for us like water. I finally let out a steady breath, believing for just a fraction of a second that the danger was over. Then, a waiter in a crisp white uniform rushed past. His shoulder slammed hard into mine, knocking my small clutch open. "My apologies, madam," the waiter muttered sharply, his eyes darting frantically to the exits. He reached down to help, his hand brushing the inside of my bag before he vanished rapidly into the crowded hall. I looked down, freezing completely. Sitting on top of my lipstick was a cheap, cracked burner phone I had never seen before. The screen lit up instantly with a single text message. "I know what he really is. The police work for him, but I don't. Run before he kills you too." The absolute chaos of the morning finally settled, leaving only a thick, electric tension between us as we returned to the penthouse. Tonight was the city's annual corporate banquet. Yesterday, I wasn't even invited. Tonight, as the new CEO, I was the guest of honor. Spread across the dark coverlet of the master bed was a breathtaking, deep emerald silk gown. I slipped the heavy, luxurious fabric over my shoulders, but my fingers couldn't manage the intricate clasp at the nape of my neck. I stepped out of the walk-in closet. Yunji was already dressed in a flawless midnight blue tuxedo, leaning casually against the doorframe. He was watching me with a dark, starving focus. I turned my back to him, lifting my dark curls out of the way. He didn't rush. He closed the distance with a slow, predatory grace, the intoxicating scent of smoked cedar completely surrounding me. His calloused, heavily tattooed fingers brushed against my bare shoulders. The scorching heat of his touch melted right through the thin emerald silk, leaving a trail of fire along my skin as he secured the delicate clasp. "You look terrified, Queen," he murmured, his lips hovering mere millimeters from my ear. "I've never walked into a room of billionaires before," I admitted, my voice a breathless whisper. His large hands slid from my shoulders down to my waist, gripping me with a grounding, possessive weight. "They are nothing. When you walk into that ballroom tonight, you don't look down. You own them. And anyone who forgets that will answer to me." An hour later, the bright flash of paparazzi cameras blinded me as we stepped out of the armored SUV. The grand ballroom of the plaza was packed with the city's elite. The moment Yunji and I walked through the gilded doors, the entire chaotic room fell dead silent. He kept me flush against his side, a lethal, untouchable shadow, demanding absolute respect from the people who had mocked me yesterday. We moved through the crowd, the elite parting for us like water. I finally let out a steady breath, believing for just a fraction of a second that the danger was over. Then, a waiter in a crisp white uniform rushed past. His shoulder slammed hard into mine, knocking my small clutch open. "My apologies, madam," the waiter muttered sharply, his eyes darting frantically to the exits. He reached down to help, his hand brushing the inside of my bag before he vanished rapidly into the crowded hall. I looked down, freezing completely. Sitting on top of my lipstick was a cheap, cracked burner phone I had never seen before. The screen lit up instantly with a single text message. "I know what he really is. The police work for him, but I don't. Run before he kills you too." I shoved the cracked burner phone deep into my clutch, my fingers trembling against the cool emerald silk of my gown. Before I could process the terrifying warning, a heavy, calloused hand settled at the base of my spine. Yunji stepped smoothly to my side, his dark eyes sweeping the crowded ballroom before locking onto mine. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply pulled me closer, the blistering heat of his chest anchoring me against the rising panic. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that resonated right through my dress. The clinking of crystal glasses suddenly stopped. At the center of the gilded ballroom, a distinguished older man stepped up to the microphone. Tristan's father. The patriarch of the family we had just bankrupted. He didn't look defeated. He looked venomous. "Ladies and gentlemen," the older man announced, his voice echoing off the marble pillars. "We are honored to have the new owner of my family's legacy here tonight, Sophie." 100 pairs of elite, calculating eyes snapped to me. Camera flashes erupted, blinding me. "But before we raise a glass," Tristan's father continued, pulling a thick stack of glossy photographs from his coat. The press should know exactly who financed her sudden rise to power. She isn't a brilliant CEO. She's a front. A pretty distraction for the Daeshin syndicate to launder their dirty money. Gasps rippled through the wealthy crowd. The flashing cameras doubled in speed, swarming toward us like predators tasting blood. The trap was perfectly laid. Public ruin, broadcast to the entire city. I expected Yunji to be furious. Instead, the Underworld King let out a low, dark chuckle. He didn't back away from the blinding lights. He stepped directly in front of me, shielding me completely from the cameras. He reached into his tuxedo jacket, pulling out a small black remote. "You think you can expose me, Arthur?" Yunji's voice was deadly calm, cutting through the chaotic murmurs. "I brought the press here tonight to broadcast your confession." He pressed a single button. The massive digital screens flanking the ballroom stage flickered to life. Instead of corporate logos, security footage filled the screens, showing Tristan's father handing briefcases of cash to the very city officials he claimed to serve. The patriarch's smug expression instantly disintegrated into sheer terror. The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. The press abandoned us, swarming the stage like starving wolves. Yunji turned to me, a breathtakingly wicked smile on his lips. His hand found my waist again. Then the grand chandeliers above us exploded. The golden ballroom plunged into pitch blackness. The deafening crack of automatic gunfire shattered the air. Screams erupted from all sides. Before my brain could even register the danger, Yunji moved. His massive, muscular frame tackled me to the marble floor, completely covering my body with his as glass rained down on us in the dark. The weight of his massive body pressing me into the marble floor was the only thing keeping me anchored as the world tore itself apart. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire drowned out the screams of the city's elite. Showers of shattered crystal from the chandeliers rained down around us in the pitch-black ballroom, but not a single piece touched my skin. Yunji absorbed it all. The air instantly thickened with the bitter scent of gunpowder and copper, completely overwhelming the expensive perfumes that had filled the room moments ago. "Do exactly what I say, Sophie." His voice was a low, grating whisper right against my ear, entirely devoid of fear. "Do not let go of my hand." He shifted his weight off me just enough to pull me to my feet. In the brief, strobing flashes of muzzle fire, I saw the lethal focus in his dark eyes. He drew a heavy matte black weapon from his tuxedo jacket. His other arm wrapped like an iron band around my waist, hauling me flush against his side. He didn't run wildly. He moved with a terrifying, calculated precision through the chaotic dark. Every time a shadow stepped into our path, Yunji fired. He was flawlessly orchestrating our survival, his movements a brutal, fluid dance of violence, while keeping me entirely shielded behind the solid wall of his chest. We reached the heavy service doors near the kitchens. The freezing night air rushed in, mixing with the smoke. The armored SUV was waiting in the alley, the engine already roaring. Just as we crossed the threshold, a sudden blinding flash erupted from the staircase to our left. Yunji didn't shoot back immediately. Instead, he violently twisted his body, throwing me forward into the open door of the SUV. A sharp, unnatural tear of fabric ripped through the air, followed by a low, guttural exhale from Yunji. He didn't fall. He smoothly turned and fired twice into the stairwell, silencing the attacker instantly, before climbing into the back seat right behind me. The SUV tires screeched against the asphalt, tearing us away from the plaza. The cabin was completely dark, the silence heavy and suffocating after the deafening noise of the ballroom. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely breathe. I reached out in the dark, desperate to feel the reassuring warmth of his chest. My trembling fingers brushed against his broad shoulder, sinking into the torn, ruined fabric of his midnight blue tuxedo. The fabric wasn't just torn. It was completely soaked in warm, thick liquid. A terrified sob caught in my throat. I looked over, my eyes finally adjusting to the passing streetlights. The pristine white shirt beneath his jacket was stained deep, vibrant crimson. He had taken a bullet for me, and he hadn't made a single sound. We made it back to the penthouse in a blur of screeching tires and heavy silence. I didn't wait for his men to offer help. I practically guided Yunji into the sprawling master bathroom, the harsh overhead lights replaced by the dim, cool glow of the city skyline filtering through the frosted glass. He sank onto the edge of the dark marble bathtub. His breathing was steady, infuriatingly calm, even as my shaking hands peeled the ruined midnight blue tuxedo jacket from his broad shoulders. The white shirt beneath was soaked, clinging to his heavily tattooed skin, the fabric ripped open at the left bicep. I grabbed a thick white towel, turning the brass faucet until the water ran warm. When I pressed the damp cloth against the jagged graze on his arm, he didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the torn skin. His dark, consuming gaze was locked entirely on my face, tracking every flicker of emotion in my eyes. "You're trembling, Queen," he murmured. His voice was a low, rough vibration that echoed beautifully off the marble walls. "You took a bullet for me," I whispered, carefully wiping away the dark crimson streaks over his dragon ink. "You didn't even hesitate. I would burn the entire city to ash before I let a single piece of glass touch you," he vowed softly. The final wall between us completely crumbled. Staring at the lethal underworld boss bleeding on the edge of a bathtub, the fear I had held for his dark reality evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a treacherous, overwhelming heat. I wasn't afraid of the monster. I was terrified of losing the man protecting me. I dropped the damp towel onto the counter. Before I could process my next move, Yunji reached up. His large, calloused hand, still dusted with debris from the ballroom, captured the back of my neck. He pulled me down, his mouth crashing against mine with a savage, devastating hunger. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an absolute claiming. I tangled my fingers deep into his dark hair, pulling his solid frame flush against me. The metallic scent of blood was completely erased by his intoxicating scent of smoked cedar and raw, undeniable desire. The cold marble of the bathtub pressed against my legs as he pulled me closer, erasing every logical thought I had left. A sharp electronic ringtone shattered the heavy air. His encrypted phone vibrated aggressively against the marble counter. Yunji broke the kiss, his chest heaving, his dark eyes blazing with frustration. He reached out blindly and tapped the speaker button, keeping his other arm banded tightly around my waist. "We miss the new CEO," a distorted, mocking voice echoed from the device, filling the quiet bathroom. "But we found her estranged little sister walking home from campus. Let's negotiate, King." The distorted laughter echoed off the marble walls before Yunji violently ended the call, plunging the bathroom into a suffocating quiet. My little sister, Lily. We hadn't spoken in a year, but the thought of her trapped in the hands of a rival cartel froze the blood in my veins. Yunji didn't pause to comfort me. The devoted man who had just kissed me vanished, replaced entirely by a ruthless warlord. He stood up, ignoring the blood soaking his torn shirt, and strode into the master bedroom. I followed, watching in terrified awe as he pulled a heavy tactical bag from beneath the floorboards, rapidly loading magazines into matte black weapons. "Lock the penthouse," he commanded, his voice a lethal, grating hum. "Do not open the door for anyone. I will bring her back." "You're going alone?" I asked. He slid a weapon into his shoulder holster, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "They want a war queen. I am going to give them a slaughter." He turned toward the door, but I stepped directly into his path. My emerald dress was rumpled, my hands still trembling, but I refused to move aside. "No," I stated, forcing my chin up. "They took her to draw you out. If you walk into their territory blindly, they'll kill you both." His jaw clenched. "Sophie, move." "You gave me an empire," I fired back, my voice finally steadying. "Let me use it." I didn't wait for his permission. I rushed to the massive glass desk overlooking the city skyline, throwing open the high-powered corporate laptop. I bypassed the standard protocols, logging directly into the massive financial mainframe I now controlled. If the rival cartel wanted a war, I would bleed them dry before a single bullet was fired. Yunji stepped up behind me. The blistering heat of his chest radiated against my back as he rested his calloused hands on my leather chair. He watched the screen with a dark, predatory focus as my fingers flew across the keyboard. "Name their front companies," I demanded. A slow, wicked smile touched his lips. He leaned down, the scent of smoked cedar enveloping me as he whispered 3 corporate names into my ear. Using my absolute authority as the CEO, I triggered a hostile algorithmic takeover. I froze their supply chains, liquidated their offshore holdings, and trapped their operational funds in impenetrable legal gridlock. 10 minutes. That was all it took to completely bankrupt their legitimate operations. The spare encrypted phone on the desk rang instantly. I hit the speaker button. The arrogant voice from before was gone, replaced by frantic, furious screaming. "You froze my accounts! I'll end her right now!" I leaned into the microphone. My pulse raced wildly, but my tone was absolute ice. "Touch one hair on my sister's head, and I will erase the rest of your money. Name the location. We are coming to get her." The freezing, salt-heavy air of the shipping yards whipped my hair around my face as our armoured SUV came to a halt. We were entirely surrounded. Dozens of heavily armed men stepped out from behind the towering, rusted containers, their weapons levelled directly at our vehicle. Yunji cut the engine. He didn't look at the small army outside. He looked at me. "Stay behind me," he instructed, the command absolute. "I'm the one holding their money hostage," I reminded him, my voice steady despite the frantic rhythm of my heart. "They need me alive." A dark, proud gleam flashed in his eyes. He pushed his door open, the heavy steel acting as a shield as we stepped out into the damp night. I stayed flush against his side, protected by the solid wall of his broad, muscular frame. Standing in the centre of the yard, illuminated by the harsh glare of a single floodlight, was the rival boss. 2 of his massive enforcers flanked him, gripping my younger sister, Lily. She was terrified, her face pale in the stark lighting, but she looked unharmed. "Unfreeze my accounts," the boss snarled, his eyes darting nervously to the matte black tactical weapon resting effortlessly in Yunji's grip. "Or the girl doesn't leave this dock." I stepped out slightly from behind Yunji's shoulder, lifting my phone so the screen illuminated my face. Release my sister first, then I'll make the transfer. You have zero leverage here. The boss let out a harsh, mocking laugh, completely ignoring me to look directly at Yunji. You brought your pretty little accountant to a gunfight, King. The boss sneered, his tone dripping with arrogant disrespect. Tell your corporate pet to hit the unfreeze button before I lose my patience and… The deafening crack of a gunshot shattered the night. Yunji didn't blink. He didn't issue a warning. He hadn't even fully raised his arm. He simply pulled the trigger. The boss's massive right-hand man screamed, collapsing heavily onto the wet asphalt, clutching his shattered kneecap. Total chaos erupted. The rival men frantically raised their weapons, but Yunji's posture remained terrifyingly relaxed. He didn't look at the groaning man on the ground. He shifted the smoking barrel of his gun directly to the center of the rival boss's forehead. The suffocating silence that followed was infinitely heavier than the gunshot. Speak to my wife with respect, Yunji murmured. His voice barely carried over the roaring ocean wind, but the lethal, icy promise in his tone made every single man in the yard freeze completely. The rival boss raised his trembling hands slowly, the arrogant sneer completely erased by the smoking barrel pressed directly between his eyes. He gave a frantic, jerky nod to his remaining enforcer. The massive man shoved Lily forward. She stumbled across the wet asphalt, sobbing quietly until my arms wrapped tightly around her shaking shoulders. Get in the car, Yunji commanded softly, his lethal gaze never leaving the rival boss. I pulled Lily into the armored SUV, shoving her into the back seat and slamming the heavy steel door shut. I pressed my hands against the tinted window, waiting for Yunji to back away. He lowered his weapon, his expression cold and completely detached, and turned toward the vehicle. That was when I saw it. A faint, rapid, blinking red light attached to the base of the rusted shipping container directly behind him. Yunji! I screamed, slapping my hands desperately against the bulletproof glass. His apex predator instincts flared instantly. He didn't look back at the bomb. He looked at the SUV. He lunged forward, throwing his massive body against the reinforced door just as the night tore itself apart. The explosion was completely deafening, a blinding wall of searing orange fire and twisting metal. The sheer force of the shockwave hit the armored vehicle like a freight train, launching the massive SUV completely off the ground. My head slammed violently against the doorframe, and the chaotic, burning world instantly faded into a heavy, suffocating darkness. The rhythmic mechanical hum of a heart monitor was the first thing that pulled me back. I blinked against the harsh, sterile white light. The freezing ocean wind and the suffocating scent of burning metal were gone, replaced by the sharp, clinical smell of antiseptic. I was lying in a narrow, immaculate hospital bed, dressed in a soft cotton medical gown. My vision blurred, then focused on the sleek, modern walls of the penthouse medical wing. Lily was curled up in a leather recliner beside me, covered in a dark cashmere blanket, fast asleep and completely unharmed. I pushed myself up, my muscles aching, a dull throb pulsing at my temple. The emerald silk gown I had worn to the docks was folded on a sterile stainless steel counter, ruined and coated in thick grey ash. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I ripped the IV line from the back of my hand, ignoring the sharp sting, and swung my bare feet onto the freezing tile floor. The sprawling penthouse was terrifyingly quiet.
There were no heavily armed guards patrolling the hall. There was no intoxicating scent of smoked cedar lingering in the air.
Yunji?
I called out, my voice cracking in the empty, pristine corridor. Only absolute silence answered. The terrifying, devoted man who had promised to burn the world to ash before leaving my side was completely gone.
I stood in the freezing, sterile corridor, the silence ringing in my ears. Yunji was gone. The man who had shielded me from a roaring explosion had vanished, leaving me entirely alone in his fortress. But the cold panic freezing my veins didn't last. It hardened into absolute, blinding rage. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the medical wing, marching straight into the sprawling living room. The penthouse wasn't empty. 4 of Yunji's highest-ranking lieutenants stood around a massive glass table, their faces grim, loading heavy tactical weapons. They froze when they saw me in the plain white cotton gown. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice carrying zero hesitation. "The blast threw him clear, but the rival cartel secured him in the chaos," the lead enforcer stated, his dark eyes tight with fury. "We are mobilizing a strike team to tear the city apart. Stay here, madam. It will be bloody." "No," I commanded, stepping forward. "You don't tear the city apart blindly. You cut off their air supply first." I walked right past the heavily armed men and sat at the command desk. My fingers flew across the sleek keyboard. Yunji had given me absolute control over the Daishin Syndicate's legitimate corporate fronts, and I was going to use every single cent. "I am freezing every offshore account associated with their network," I said, the bright glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. "I'm liquidating their shell companies and releasing their private ledgers to the federal authorities. Within exactly 4 minutes, they will have no money, no safe houses, and no leverage to hold him." The lieutenant stared at me in stunned silence before a fierce, dark respect settled over their faces. I wasn't just the boss's wife to be protected anymore. I was the queen pulling the strings. "Sweep the docks," I ordered without looking away from the screen. "They won't have the resources to move him far. Bring my husband back." The men bowed sharply and rushed for the private elevators. The penthouse fell completely silent again, save for the rapid clicking of my keyboard as I erased our enemies from existence. I was so focused on destroying the cartel's ledgers that I didn't hear the security bypass alarm beep. The private elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I let out a breath of relief and spun the leather chair around. "Did you find—" The words died instantly in my throat. It wasn't Yunji. It wasn't his lieutenants. Standing in the foyer was Tristan. My disgraced, bankrupted ex-boss looked completely unhinged. His expensive navy suit was torn and stained with sweat. His eyes were wide with a frantic, pathetic desperation, and his trembling hands were gripped tightly around a heavy silver pistol aimed directly at my chest. "You took everything from me!" Tristan screamed, the heavy silver pistol shaking violently in his slick hands. The barrel remained pointed directly at my chest. "My company, my family's legacy, my money. It's all gone, Sophie." I didn't cower. I remained seated in the leather chair, staring at the pathetic, ruined man who had fired me just 48 hours ago. The white cotton of my medical gown offered zero physical protection, but the absolute power of the syndicate thrummed through my veins. "You lost everything because you are weak, Tristan," I stated, my voice echoing coldly across the marble floor. "I just sped up the inevitable." He let out a deranged, broken laugh, taking a step forward. His finger tightened on the trigger. "If I'm going to prison, I'm taking the Underworld Queen with me. Let's see how much your monster loves you when you're—" The words abruptly died in his throat. The ambient temperature in the sprawling living room seemed to plummet. A towering shadow effortlessly detached itself from the darkness of the hallway right behind Tristan. Yunji stepped into the dim light. He looked like he had literally walked through fire. His white shirt was charred and torn at the ribs, soot and ash staining his heavily tattooed skin. A fresh, jagged cut marked his sharp jawline, but his dark eyes were alight with an icy, merciless fury. He didn't make a sound. He didn't even draw his weapon. With a terrifying, fluid strike, Yunji gripped Tristan's wrist and twisted. A sickening snap echoed through the room. Tristan shrieked, dropping the silver pistol onto the floor. Before my ex could even fall, Yunji kicked the back of his knees, forcing him violently to the ground. Yunji placed the heavy heel of his custom boot squarely in the center of Tristan's back, pinning the sobbing man against the polished stone. The Underworld King looked up, his gaze locking with mine. The lethal rage in his eyes instantly melted into profound, dark pride. He reached down, picked up the discarded silver pistol, and walked toward my desk. He didn't check himself for injuries. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He already knew I was untouchable. Yunji stopped in front of me, flipping the weapon smoothly in his calloused, bruised hand. He offered it to me, the handle resting on his palm. "You held the line, Queen," he murmured, his voice a low, raspy vibration that carried the scent of smoke and absolute devotion. He nudged the gun closer to my fingers, his dark eyes shifting to the crying man on the floor. "He disrespected you in your own fortress. Your turn." I looked down at the heavy silver pistol resting on his calloused palm. The metal was still warm. I wrapped my fingers around the grip, the weight of it an exhilarating reminder of the absolute power I now held. Tristan whimpered, his face pressed against the cold marble, begging frantically for his life. I stepped closer, the white cotton of my gown brushing against Yunji's ruined, soot-covered shirt. I didn't point the weapon. I didn't need to. "I'm not going to shoot you, Tristan," I said, my voice echoing with a calm, terrifying finality. "Bullets are too fast. I've already erased your money, your legacy, and your name. You are going to spend the rest of your life rotting in a concrete cell, knowing that the woman you tried to break now owns the very city you used to rule." I lowered the weapon and looked at Yunji's lieutenants, who had silently filed back into the room. "Take him out of my sight. Hand him over to the chief of police." Tristan's hysterical sobbing faded down the corridor as the heavy elevator doors sealed shut. The sprawling penthouse fell into a profound, heavy silence. The war was over. The adrenaline that had kept me standing suddenly vanished, leaving my muscles trembling. Before my knees could buckle, Yunji was there. He swept the weapon from my hand, tossing it onto the glass desk, and pulled me flush against his broad, battered chest. The blistering heat of his skin burned through my thin gown. The scent of smoke, ash, and pure devotion wrapped around me, anchoring me entirely. I buried my face in the curve of his neck, right over the raised ink of his dragon tattoos, my hands gripping his torn white shirt. "You are terrifying, Queen," he murmured, his deep voice vibrating against my collarbone. He tangled his hands in my loose curls, tilting my head back. His dark, calculating eyes were completely stripped of their lethal edge, leaving nothing but a raw, starving hunger.
He claimed my mouth with a devastating, uncompromising heat, kissing me until the rest of the world ceased to exist. He lifted me effortlessly, carrying me to the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glowing city skyline. He didn't set me down. He kept me wrapped securely in his arms, resting his chin on the top of my head as we stared out at the sprawling, glittering empire below. "I bought this city to keep you safe," he whispered into the quiet dark, his arms tightening possessively around my waist.
"But you conquered it." I leaned back against the solid wall of his chest, knowing with absolute certainty that I would never be a victim again. I didn't just survive the dangerous man next door. I claimed him, and together, we owned it all.